Good evening, and welcome to this evening's Savor event. I'm Mackenzie Smith, the University Librarian and Vice Provost for Digital Scholarship at UC Davis, and I'm your co-host for this evening. While we're not yet able to be together in person, I'm delighted to welcome you virtually to Shields Library here on the UC Davis campus. As you can see, we're live streaming tonight's performance from outside in the library courtyard for the health and safety of our speakers. And health of a different kind is at the heart of tonight's conversation. We created the Savor series as a place to explore some of the most important research in food and wine happening at UC Davis today. There may be nothing more important than the first food that humans consume, milk. As we hear from our speakers tonight, human milk not only provides nutrition for babies, it also supports their growth and development over the first few years of their life through the complex interplay with microbes that live in the infant digestive system and nowhere else. In a few minutes, my colleague and co-host, Andrew Waterhouse, who directs the Robert Mondavi Institute for Wine and Food Science, will introduce tonight's panel and speakers. But first, it is my honor to introduce UC Davis's Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, Mary Krogan, who will provide a few words of welcome on behalf of the university. Provost Krogan earned her bachelor's degree in community health right here at UC Davis. After earning a PhD in epidemiology at Johns Hopkins University, she returned to the University of California and spent 30 years as a professor at the UCSF School of Medicine and executive director of the Research Grants Program Office at the Office of the President. During that time, she also served as chair of the university's system-wide academic senate, a woman of many talents. Most recently, she was vice president for research and economic development at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and she returned to UC Davis, her alma mater, last year. As the chief academic officer of UC Davis, including the UC Davis Health System in Sacramento, Provost Krogan oversees all aspects of the university's mission of teaching, research, and public service. Her top priorities include maintaining and advancing educational excellence, augmenting the university's capacity to perform critical research, and furthering its culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're delighted to have Provost Krogan back at UC Davis and here with us tonight to help us open our program. So please welcome Mary Krogan.
Thank you, Mackenzie, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of Chancellor May and all of UC Davis, I want to welcome all of you to this exciting presentation in our Savor Lecture Series. As University Librarian and Vice Provost Smith has said, there may be nothing more important than the first food we consume, milk. That idea alone would be more than sufficient to merit a panel discussion related to human milk. But this evening's topic is especially compelling. As you've just heard, a team of UC Davis researchers has demonstrated that colonizing infants with the B. infantis strain of probiotic bacteria, which then interacts in complex ways with milk in their own digestive system, produces significant benefits to infant health and development. That said, this event tells several larger stories about UC Davis as well. It demonstrates our leadership in the areas of food and nutrition, the excellence of our faculty and our facilities, and the emphasis we place on innovative transdisciplinary research. The project you will learn about involved work not only in food and nutrition, but also in chemistry, immunology, medicine, and public health. Its success, including the development of a spin-off company, Evolve Biosystems, to bring a baby probiotic containing B. infantis to market, earned the research team a Chancellor's Innovation Award in 2020. There is also an overarching story here, our institutional mission and long record of utilizing our intellectual resources to make a positive impact on people's lives. In this connection, I want to thank the research team in our own Office of Research for facilitating the transfer of this new technology extremely quickly so it can now benefit families who need it. And this particular project is of personal interest to me. As a reproductive and perinatal epidemiologist, I know the intergenerational effects on neurodevelopment, cognition, and health that are derived from nutrition during infancy and early childhood. And as a mother of an infant who had a hypersensitivity disorder that prevented her from eating solid foods and brought her growth from the 60th percentile to only the 3rd percentile, I had to watch my own child nearly wither away from a lack of nutrition until she was finally accurately diagnosed and able to recover. This product would have made the world of difference. I'm happy to say that she is now a graduate student and thankfully did not suffer any long-term consequences. So as I noted, I know both personally and professionally of the importance of this research. Again, thank you all for joining us this evening. I know you are as eager as I am to hear the discussion and to learn more about this outstanding research. Thank you for all you've done.
Thank you, Provost Krogan. On behalf of the Robert Mondavi Institute, we are thrilled to be partners here with the library on this Savor presentation. I find it particularly interesting because it really demonstrates the power of the collaborations we have going on this campus, across the campus. Before I hand things over to our moderator and panelists, I'd like to remind everyone that if you have questions, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and at the end of the program we'll get to as many as we can. Our moderator, Jennifer Smilowitz, received her PhD in nutritional biology here at UC Davis. She studies lactation, milk science, and the gut microbiome at all ages. Her research indicates that the period from pre-pregnancy up till the age of 2 is critical in terms of how nutrition affects, has long-lasting consequences of an individual's health and potential. She has a number of positions. She's director of the Scientific and Strategic Development at the International Milk Genomics Consortium, and she's a faculty affiliate in the Department of Food Science and Technology here on campus. And finally, she's associate director of the Foods for Health Institute. I have also heard from a reliable source that she's a very passionate tango dancer. In a few moments, Jennifer will introduce the contestants, the panelists. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Waterhouse. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Savor event, our first superfood and infant microbiome. As you know, it's 606 days, we're in the pandemic, and well, we're a little bit tired of the Zoom presentations. Aren't you? We thought we'd do things a little bit differently, maybe a little more fun, with a game show approach called What's That Science? So, thank you for joining us today. Below is a virtual Zoom audience. I'd like to introduce our contestants, Contestant A and Contestant B. Contestant A, Bruce German from UC Davis, and Contestant B, Professor Katie Hinde from Arizona State University. First, a little bit about our contestants before we start the show. Bruce German, distinguished professor at UC Davis, is a world-renowned food chemist and a true visionary and a thought leader in milk science and lactation. He has published over 500 articles that have been cited 50,000 times. So what that means is if you multiply his height to the number of citations, you would have 242 Empire State Buildings. That's pretty phenomenal. Now, his passion and his brilliance in the field is mirrored with his practical merits. So he's been the co-founder of several companies that measure health and provide solutions to babies, mothers, and families. He has 2 lovely and brilliant daughters and an amazing wife who provides lactation support and education as an international board certified lactation consultant. In his spare time, which doesn't have very much. He plays ice hockey, he skis, and he listens to the Finnish heavy metal operatic band Nightwish. He's one of the most inspirational people I know, and I can say that because he was my academic advisor in 2002, and we have been working together ever since. I guess he just can't get rid of me. Now, Dr. Katie Hinde is an amazing, a world-renowned anthropologist. She weaves social and life sciences together to understand the complexities of behavioral biology, evolutionary ecology, and behavioral biology of milk, lactation, moms and babies. She's brilliant, and her passion to improve the lives of mothers, babies, and their families is manifested in several platforms. So she's very practical, right? She really wants to share her research with everyone, from researchers and clinicians and the public. So one of her platforms is this creative, lively blog called Mammals Suck Milk. Another, she has this TED Talk, What We Don't Know About Mother's Milk, which currently has 1.5 million views. And she was recently featured in the Netflix docuseries called Babies. You might have heard of it, it's pretty famous. And that docuseries explores the developmental processes of babies in the first year of life. In her spare time, Katie hikes marathons and ultra marathons. She runs March Mammal Madness, which is a scientific program that teaches 400,000 learners annually. And she leads a One Health program in Australia to help educate learners about basically global good citizenship. So for tonight's event, we have 8 great rounds about milk and lactation for entirely arbitrary scores. I note Katie takes a commanding 5-point lead for her superior contestant photo. Are you ready?
Yes, excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, Katie. What is milk?
It's a great question. Milk is, of course, food. It provides fats, proteins, sugars, minerals, vitamins, all the building blocks and fuels for a baby to develop and function. And I think it's very easy for us to think about milk as food because as adults, we navigate a world with extensive dairy aisles at the grocery store. But that ubiquity of milk as a food in our environment, I think, distracts sometimes from some of the other amazing facets of what milk is. Milk is also protection. As an infant is developing, mother's milk or parent's milk provides immunofactors, antibodies, and protection against pathogens and other kinds of threats the baby might experience, and helps to guide and entrain the immune development of the baby as it grows and develops. Even more than that, mother's milk is a signal. The hormones of the mother's body are transferred through her milk to the baby and affect the baby's physiology, interact with the baby's physiology, and shape trajectories of growth and development. So in some ways, the food of milk are the building blocks, and the hormones of milk are the blueprints. And so milk is this amazing dynamic fluid that's structured across time to shape and guide and be tailored to the development of an infant.
Wow. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, so judges say, yes, we'll accept that answer, but note, we will also accept that milk is food, milk is medicine, and milk is signal. Okay, 10 points, Katie.
Yes.
Okay, so you
Backwards.
Sorry.
It's upside down.
Oh, okay. That's why. Okay. So Katie, you specifically emphasized that milk is so much more than food.
So much more than food.
So much more than food. But,
So much more.
But let's talk about how milk is food. So,
okay. Milk, who's milk food for, right? Well, the first thing you have to think about, of course, is that milk is food for the baby. All right, so let's just take one aspect of the food of milk and talk about the fats, the lipids in milk. Now, these lipids are going to be important for developing tissues in the baby, particularly the brain. The brain is made of a lot of fats. And we can start thinking about some of the specific fats, right? Like the long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, the LC-PUFAs, which most people know of as omega-3s, omega-6s, right? Omega-3s are quite common and important for nutrition. They help shape aspects of neurodevelopment, brain function. And what's really amazing about human milk, for example, is that it's particularly enriched in omega-3s. But humans aren't uniquely adapted in our ability to synthesize or construct omega-3s. Humans are quite special relative to other primates, our relatives, in that we are able to get a lot of omega-3s into our diet. And so because it's in adult diets, it ends up being in the milk for the baby. We can go even deeper and think about how does the mammary gland synthesize that lipid molecule, right? Well, it ends up passing through the cells of the mammary gland, and as it passes through, it gets enveloped in the milk fat globule membrane, right? And this is literally tissue from the mother, an envelope of love that's wrapped around that milk fat globule membrane and goes to the infant and provides cells from the mother, right? Part of the mother passes in that way. And we can go even deeper and think about things like the sphingolipids, right? Now those fats provide insulation on the connections between neurons within the brain. And they help electrical signals travel faster between neurons. So the brain is functioning faster and more efficiently. Those are just a few of the examples. We can also talk about things like the proteins. Human milk is enriched for proteins that are associated with immune function, with digestion and metabolism, and with brain function when we compare that to a common biomedical model like the rhesus monkey, right? So this is work by Danielle LeMay, Kristen Beck, myself when I was here at Davis, looking at the ways in which human milk seems to be adapted for human life, right? So humans, when we look at how humans live their lives relative to other primates, we live in larger social groups, we eat more complex foods, and we have much larger brains. Well, that's going to change what we need to do to digest, the pathogens we're going to encounter, and the cognitive problems we're going to solve. And milk is tailored to help build a baby to tackle that. The food of milk, I think, is just quite fascinating in how it feeds the baby.
Wow, that's exactly what I was hoping to hear. All of those details. 5 points to Katie. Excellent. Bruce, do you have anything to add?
5 points is going to be tough to beat. All right. So one of the things that we've discovered in the context of milk as food is quite surprising. That is, about a third of the molecular constituents of milk are undigestible by babies. Why would mothers dissolve themselves to make undigestible matter? So the first question, what are they? So Carlito Labriglia brought his entire team to understand chemically what are these molecules. They're little bits of fiber. But they're not fiber from the mother's diet. She actually synthesizes them. So mothers are making bits of fiber, and yet they go right through the baby. So clearly they're not feeding the baby. What else could they be feeding? So that was the question. Then we realized they're feeding microbes, but not just any microbes. So imagine the early life of the baby. They're born sterile. They have, in essence, sterile inside and out. They have no immune system, and they're ripe for pathogens. So they're encountering pathogenic bacteria that are competing to colonize and, in fact, infect the surfaces of the baby. And that's a real threat to the early stages of human infants. Probiotics don't help because there's nothing for them to grow on. And then we found this remarkable strain of bifidobacteria, Bifidobacteria infantis, this heroic bacteria that emerged through coevolution that consumes all of the undigestible carbohydrate, the oligosaccharides of breast milk, and it is in fact a superhero. This remarkable bacteria in the lower intestine of the baby multiplies and consumes the oligosaccharides from breast milk, grows, fills up the baby, drops the ability of pathogens to colonize the baby, in effect protects that baby throughout the early weeks and months of life. So what we realized, breast milk feeds the baby, and it feeds a very specific bacterium in the baby. What an idea. Judges.
Oh, well, Bruce, because human milk contains about 15 grams of human milk oligosaccharides per liter, you get 15 points. Nice work. Katie, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so mammals are adapted to digest mother's milk. And they do that by producing the enzyme lactase. And that enzyme cleaves the primary sugar in milk, lactose, into glucose and galactose so that they can have an energy source. And at weaning, mammals stop digesting milk. So the ability to produce that enzyme just automatically deteriorates. It's genetically controlled. Now humans who started herding animals for meat, those individuals that produced lactase just from genetic mutation for longer in their lives were able to consume dairy products from those meat animals. And this led to a selective regime between cultural practices and the genetic endowment in human populations that allowed the persistence of the enzyme lactase into adulthood. And we see this amazing gene culture coevolution in humans at least 4 different separate occasions in human evolution. And this arose in response to cow milk, camel milk, and now when we look around the world, we see people consuming many kinds of dairy milks: sheep, goat, horse. And this means that the cultural practice of dairying has made milk food for adult humans.
That's fascinating. Bruce, do you want to make a comment about maybe some advancements in technology over the last century?
Yes, I would. So, in order to understand how these bacteria were developing, David Mills, world-famous microbiologist, and his team needed material to study. So Daniela Barile, a chemist, and Juliana Bell, a chemical engineer, obtained, using modern technologies, the oligosaccharides similar to human milk from cow's milk, from dairy streams. So enabling the entire scientific process of discovery using modern separation methods from milk. So we're now realizing that we can use industrial dairy production to use technologies to isolate these materials and even ultimately to provide them for babies who wouldn't get milk otherwise.
Wow. Both of you scored 5 points. Way to go. Okay, so Katie now has 25 points and Bruce has 20. And as Alec Trebek would say, it's anybody's game. Okay, our next round are favorite findings of milk and lactation. Okay, so can you please share 3 of your favorite findings related to milk, lactation, and dairy? Katie, what is one of your favorite milk or lactation findings?
Oh, that's a great question. One of my favorite findings is that at times, mammals can make slightly different biological recipes in their milk, whether they're raising a son or a daughter. And this hasn't been studied in very many mammals, but where we've looked at it, we see that things like yield, shown here mostly in red, seems to be a bit higher for daughters, whereas the energy density, the amount of fats, proteins, and such, are slightly enriched for sons. Now this graph that I've put together of the state of the science shows that relatively little work has been done in this area. And red means that there's slightly more for daughters on average. Blue means there's slightly more for sons on average. Purple means that there doesn't seem to necessarily be a difference. And sometimes different studies show different things, or even within the same study, it shows different things. But in general, what these data are starting to tell us is that when sons and daughters have been shaped to have different developmental trajectories or pace of life, or what is prioritized first, there might be tailoring to the milk to support that. So an example would be that in humans and chimpanzees and rhesus monkeys, daughter skeletons ossify faster. They develop at a faster rate than do the skeletons of sons. And this is in part supported by differences in calcium and phosphorus ratios, which are important for skeletal biology. When we looked at the milk of rhesus monkeys, we found that the calcium-phosphorus ratio in milk produced for daughters was enriched relative to that for sons. This doesn't mean that it's better or worse for sons or daughters or anything like that. It just means that there seems to be part of the tailoring for the developmental priorities for those young. It shows us one of the ways in which milk is specific to that mother-infant dyad in that time and place for those adaptive priorities. Now, we've also found some really cool things with dairy cows, which is that there are interactions between and across lactations. So dairy cows that have back-to-back daughters produce way more milk than cows that have back-to-back sons. And if a cow who produces a son on her first pregnancy then conceives a daughter while she's lactating, it increases the amount of milk she's producing. Now, we don't entirely understand the mechanisms underlying this. Maybe fetal daughters are sending estrogens that signal to the mammary gland that shape the milk production. It's unclear. But what we find is that this tiny biological effect, when you spread it across the entire US dairy herds, for example, we're talking about $200 million dairy dollars in differences in milk production from having back-to-back daughters on the first 2 pregnancies. Really exciting stuff.
Wow, sounds like an exciting finding. What about you, Bruce? Do you have one? What is one of your favorites?
Well, I was a son, so I got richer milk. But
on average,
I'm going to go in a different direction. So one of the things that's fascinating about lactation in milk is because infants are so, in essence, immature relative to full size, mothers pay forward for their development. And what that means in milk is mothers produce proteins in milk that are readily digested and digestible in the infant. So that milk is an unusually digestible form of nourishment. An absolutely brilliant idea. But milk goes even farther than that. So milk contains enzymes that in the baby activate and accelerate the digestion of the proteins. So in fact, mothers are paying forward the digestion of proteins. So clearly milk is a sophisticated system of nourishment depending on the timing and age of the infant.
Wow.
Judges?
I don't know. We're going to wait to the end because these are all sounding extremely exciting. Katie, do you have any more you want to share?
I do. So I think that there's just this phenomenal space about the bioactivity that happens at that interface between the mother and the infant. So we see this in the proteins and self-digesting in the infant's stomach, but we also see this amazing combination that babies, right? Babies drool. Babies drool a lot. They have copious saliva production. And when breast milk is combined with the baby's saliva, it can make hydrogen peroxide. And it can make hydrogen peroxide in quantities that are able to kill staph and strep and some of these other nasty pathogens that threaten babies. And this breast milk baby saliva combination is really specific to infancy. So if you combine human milk with adult saliva in a petri dish, it doesn't have that hydrogen peroxide effect. It doesn't kill those pathogens. It's an amazing dynamic combination.
Wow, that's pretty spectacular. Bruce, do you
That's
have?
going to be tough to beat.
Yep. Let's see, what do you have for
I can
us?
do it.
All right.
So when proteins from milk are digested in the baby by the enzymes in the milk, it releases peptides, small sequences of protein. And we asked a simple question. Do these extra peptides that are encrypted in the proteins and released in the baby, do they have biological activities in and of themselves? And it turns out they do. So we asked a simple question. What would be valuable for a baby? Protection from pathogens. So we tested. Do the peptides released from the proteins in the baby kill pathogenic bacteria? They do. one after another, pathogenic bacteria die rapidly because of the, in essence, activities, particular peptides. But then Ashita Shah asked a very imaginative question. We know now that milk is also feeding good bacteria. So Ashita tested the peptides that kill pathogenic bacteria. Do they kill the superhero Bifidobacteria infantis? No, they don't. It's a selective toxin. We are now thinking about the way milk prepares babies for the real world completely differently. It's not killing all bacteria. It's killing pathogens and nourishing the right bacteria. This is an amazing idea.
Ingenious. I don't know, Katie, do you have any more?
I do.
Okay.
I do have a third fantastic finding for the third round. Babies come to understand the flavors and aromas of the cuisines of their culture through the transmission of those flavors and aromas in the mother's milk. So garlic and spices and other kinds of the foods that just make our cultural practices embedded and how we come to share things with our family and our friends. Food is such an important part of holidays or special events. Even though babies that are being exclusively breastfed do not eat those foods, they experience them through the terroir of the mother's milk.
Nice.
All right, Bruce, do you have another?
All right. So it turns out that we have found bad news with our science. So by realizing how vital and critical the relationship between the milk and the oligosaccharides and the Bifidobacteria infantis, we began looking for babies around the world to see how Bifidobacteria infantis was doing. And we found some very disturbing news. In the most affluent parts of the world, where modern medicine was so successful at protecting all of us from infectious diseases with antibiotics and hygiene, and for babies with cesarean sections, there's been a wonderful benefit of that. But many of those methods have been destructive, specifically to Bifidobacteria infantis. And what we've discovered is that Bifidobacteria infantis around the world has been going down. We have been losing this wonderful superhero of a bacterium. And as that bacterium has been disappearing, especially quickly from the most affluent and modern parts of the world, we've seen a decline in infectious diseases, which you'd love to see. But we've been seeing an increase in autoimmune diseases, allergies, and asthma, and autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes. They've been all going up as Bifidobacteria infantis has been going down. And we've been looking, is there a connection?
Wow. Okay, so thank you for your contributions. You both earned 15 points. Okay, but that puts Katie in the lead with 40 points. Bruce, you have 35, but only 5 away from Katie. So we're going to move on to our fourth round.
I have more favorite findings. I bet Bruce has more favorite findings.
Okay,
can we do a fourth round of favorite findings?
Let me ask the judges. Okay, the judges agreed you may have one more round, okay? Here we go.
All right. So as we look around the world at breast milk, we also see some really exciting information about the ways in which breast milk is protective for the baby. So when we look at things like innate immunity, right? So the first line of defense, the first detection that some pathogen might be there, so something like lactoferrin in milk, we see that that's pretty similar in breast milk from population to population to population, right? It's innate human immunity. When we look at acquired immunity, so the immune response to specific pathogens that the body may have encountered in the past, so secretory IgA, IgG, these kinds, been in the news a little bit lately, we see that those are more similar among human populations that have shared lifeways, so have similar subsistence practices, so pastoralists or horticulturalists or hunter-gatherers, industrialized populations, And that's because those are going to predict the kinds of foods individuals are eating and the kinds of pathogens that they'll encounter. And so what Laura Klein at Harvard University, in collaboration with Carlita Labria's group here at UC Davis, has found is that women who are yak herders in the Himalayas have very similar acquired adaptive immunity when you look at goat and cow herders in Namibia. Right? And this tells us that mothers are passing on aspects of immune memory to babies that are specific to the kinds of things that they will encounter based on the worlds that they're navigating.
Wow.
That's a fabulous discovery, I'm not going to lie. But I'm going to take Katie's principle of immunity and run with that. So what we discovered. So remember, babies, they have to learn how to respond to the world. Their immune system has to educate itself to make two fundamental types of decisions that are critical to life and survival. The immune system has to recognize danger. And when pathogens threaten a baby, the immune system has to activate and attack it. Also, the immune system has to recognize friends, food, and themselves and the environment, and leave that alone. So the immune system has to learn to recognize danger and friend. And babies have been getting that more and more wrong. They've not been recognizing friends. They've been attacking, and that's allergies. Now, we thought that just the elimination of pathogens would be enough to educate the immune system. It's not. Bethany Henrich has realized and shown that there is an active crosstalk between the Bifidobacteria infantis when it's growing on milk oligosaccharides in the baby and the baby's immune system. In essence, milk and Bifidobacteria infantis are talking to the immune system and guiding it away from autoimmunity towards appropriate immune education. Now we realize how the bacteria is protecting babies from autoimmune diseases.
And this system is just, it's so magnificent because milk has been evolving as an adaptation for over 300 million years, right? Milk is older than dinosaurs. So the lineage that gave rise to the dinosaurs and birds, the synapsids, split. So the lineage that gave rise to the dinosaurs and birds, the sauropsids, split from the synapsid lineage that gave rise to the therapsids and the mammaliforms and then the mammals over 300 million years ago. And throughout that time, parental secretions nourishing, protecting, hydrating, guiding babies has been shaped by untold generations of natural selection. So the myriad functions of milk, its complexity, its bioactivity, its synergy between mother and baby is itself a triumph of evolutionary processes. And indeed, mammals are the last ones standing from the synapsid lineage. It's just us. And we can't know for sure why that is, but obviously the answer is milk.
I would bet all my money on milk. Okay, wow. Both of you have earned 10 points each. And Katie, you have 50 points. Bruce, you have 45. But Katie's lead is mostly due to her superior contestant photo. So you still have some hope there. Okay.
It's a great photo.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. So
taken by a graduate of UC Davis, by the way. Just Carolyn Hostetler. Just put in there.
Our next category is polarized potables. So on social media and the news outlet, we're seeing references to the mommy wars. So that seems to pit breastfeeding against formula feeding against one another. So what do you want to tell moms out there? Bruce, do you want to start?
I'll pass.
That's cool. I got this. All right. My message to the parents out there, the mothers, you're doing great. All right. You've already 3D printed a baby, and you are doing the best you can every single day. And indeed, the vast majority of mothers in the US, around the world, intend to breastfeed according to Center for Disease Control and Prevention and World Health Organization recommendations. But in the US and other places, increasingly, mothers aren't reaching their breastfeeding goals. Okay? And that is because there isn't enough support from partners, there isn't enough support from clinicians, there isn't enough support from institutions, and there isn't enough support broadly in our society and our political system. And so the message isn't for the mothers, the message is for everybody else. We've heard all the ways in which breast milk is incredibly important for infant development, but it's also really important for women's health. Right? So breastfeeding is associated with reductions in risks of a number of cancers. A mother herself, the number of months she spends breastfeeding children, that was the biologist in me. The number of months a mother spends breastfeeding babies is associated with reductions in cancer risk, reductions of metabolic dysregulation, and reductions in risk of type 2 diabetes, and a number of other health outcomes, right? So this is really about improving mother and infant health and broader public health within our society. We also have to recognize that there are a lot of challenges and obstacles, barriers and counterindications for breastfeeding for a number of women. And we need to recognize that not all babies are breastfed. Some are chest fed, some don't have mothers, some rely on other sources of nutrition. And we really owe it to them to decode mother's milk to improve alternatives to breastfeeding when breastfeeding is just not able to be supported. Although we should do as much as we can to support it wherever people want to be doing it.
Wow, Katie, thorough. Bruce, you want to add anything to that?
I agree.
Do you want to say anything more?
I enthusiastically agree.
Excellent. Okay, well, checking the current contestant standing, I believe Katie added the Soapbox Award to her score. Bruce earned a Savvy Move and Good Choice Award for his pass and agreement. Let's move on to breathtaking breakthroughs. Okay, now in our sixth. This is our sixth round. Let's talk about some really important, timely breakthroughs. Katie, can you go first?
Yes, I'm excited to go. I know we're only 30 minutes into this presentation, but I think it's about time we mentioned the pandemic not in the room, because we are outside, that we are now seeing some amazing things about the way in which breast milk is protective against COVID for babies. So we see that mothers are passing on acquired immunity to babies through their breast milk, and this can be either because they've in the past been exposed and had COVID, or even better, they've been vaccinated by an approved vaccine against COVID. And this is why the CDC and the World Health Organization are recommending strongly that women who are pregnant or plan to become pregnant or lactating to become vaccinated. And also why it's important to protect breastfeeding even if the mother does have COVID, right? So you have hand washing, hygiene, face masks, but the protection from breast milk is very important, and we now understand that mothers are not passing COVID down through the breast milk. The breast milk is protective and not infectious for COVID.
Excellent. Okay, Bruce.
Nice.
Some
All
brilliant breakthroughs. Let's see.
Okay. Turns out we've been looking exactly at the epithelial tissue of babies. This is what basically exposes them or protects them from the outside world. The surfaces on the outside and the inside. What we discovered is epithelial tissues inside babies are protected by milk and Bifidobacteria infantis fed by milk. In fact, that combination protects babies from bacteria, from toxins, and even from viruses that attack epithelial tissue. Now, when might that be important? When the world is threatened by infectious virus attacking epithelial tissues.
Excellent.
Again, milk is helping babies.
Yes, agreed. Okay, so let's
Points
look
to the judges?
Yep, we have 5 points to each of you. So Katie, you have 55. Bruce, you have 50. But Bruce, you can rack up some in the 7th round, okay? The speed round. Ready? Get set. All right, so I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions about milk and lactation, and then you'll answer them. We'll also compare your answers to the submitted answers by our audience. Okay, here we go. Ready? What is your favorite milk constituent?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to go with lacto and tetraose.
Okay, and
Oh, I'm sorry, Bruce. Did I take your answer? I mean, it is one of the oligosaccharides that is preferred by our hero, bee and Fantus.
Bruce?
Yeah, I can't beat that. It turns out the idea that mothers dissolve themselves to make little bits of fiber for that wonderful bacterium, that's a perfect answer.
All right, what is the greatest mammal?
Well, I'm going to go here with the mouse. All mothers are heroes, clearly. But the mouse is the most prodigious lactator. A mother mouse can have as many as 15 pups, and she gives birth and feeds, lactates for all 50. She's giving birth to an entire hockey game. So for me, I think this proves you don't have to be big to be important.
Bruce, you're incredibly nice, and you reference hockey. Could you be more Canadian? All right, I'm gonna go with hyena. Hyena is the greatest mammal.
Hyena?
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah. Hyenas, they develop relatively slowly compared to other carnivores, and they rely on their mother's milk for this extended period of development because they have to strengthen their bones in order to crush like the joints of like giraffes. It's amazing. The young are born with teeth because if the mom's not producing enough milk, the most aggressive one in the litter can outcompete the other. So they're born with teeth in case they have to resort to siblicide. When the mom hyenas are off on a foraging effort for multiple days, they can suspend lactation, just turn it off, and then resume it when they get back. And hyenas can only copulate through the complete consent of both parties. Hyena.
Excellent. Okay. Favorite cheese, the best kind of cheese, and we're not talking about brand, we're talking about type. Bruce.
Gouda. This is a cheese that gets better with age. I can't imagine why this appeals to me so much, but it does.
Maybe we should respect it.
All right, I'm gonna have to go with cheddar. And for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that cheddar has been made in the Somerset region of England, the hamlet of Cheddar, since at least the 12th century. And we know that because King Henry II has a record from 1170 in his treasury of ordering over 4 tons of cheddar cheese. But it was in the 1800s that Joseph Harding really revolutionized and modernized the techniques around cheddar cheese making. Right, so improving hygiene and how you process the cheddar greatly improved it. Now he was deeply dedicated to open access and open science, right? And he invited anyone to come and learn from him and his wife Rachel on this cheddar making process. And it is, of course, Open Access Week, and we are in a library, so sharing knowledge is, I think, just an incredibly important thing. And Harding agreed. So then he and Rachel traveled to Scotland, the US, and Canada, sharing information about how to make cheddar. And they sent their sons, William and Henry, to Australia and New Zealand, where they further spread the cheddar knowledge. Cheddar.
Wow, okay, well that ends the speed round. Let's see how you guys compare to our 80 submitted audience answers, okay? So, greatest mammal. Bruce, you said mouse, okay? Katie, hyena.
Hyena.
Let's see how everyone else scored. All right, well we have number 1, human, 2, whale, and 3, elephant. So no points for you guys, sorry. All right, now let's go to the next one.
I mean, that was asked before they'd seen this presentation, so now obviously there's 80 people that are gonna go out and say hyena.
Maybe we'll allow them to take it again. All right, so best type of cheese. Bruce, you said Gouda. Katie, cheddar. Yep. Let's see how everyone else scored. All right, well, cheddar is the winner.
Winner, cheddar dinner.
Nice. 5 points to Katie. All right. Next, whole, 2% non-fat or other kind of milk. Bruce, you said whole.
Heavy cream.
All right, let's see how everyone else scored. Okay, whole, 2%, and other. And what is that other? So we're seeing almond milk, we're seeing oat milk, we have goat milk, let's see, I think, and soy milk, yeah.
Goat, oat, almond, soy. I only see one mammary gland there.
Yeah, I mean, and it depends on how you define milk, right? So a lot of dairy scientists would tell you that milk only comes from a mammary gland. But an animal biologist might say, well, but milk is a parental secretion to feed, nourish, guide, and protect young. And if that's our definition of milk, then actually a lot of non-mammals make milk too. I mean, they're pretenders to the mammalian throne, but jumping spiders, discus fish, pigeons, bat flies, all of these species secrete a milk to rear their young. But they're all animals, definitely animals, animal milk.
Well, in this case, Bruce, you earned yourself 5 points. Yes. All right, your favorite ice cream. So, Bruce, you said coffee.
Coffee.
Right.
Ice cream for breakfast. What's not to like?
I'll let my kids know.
I picked mint chocolate chip, but not the kind with green food coloring.
That's right. Okay, let's see how everyone else scored. Well, chocolate is the winner, followed by vanilla. But you know what? We've got mint chip in third place. So Katie, you get 5 points. Okay, lastly, we asked Bruce and Katie what their top milk constituent or favorite milk constituent is. Bruce and Katie both said lacto and tetrose, which is a human milk oligosaccharide. All right, let's see what everyone else wanted to hear about today. Oh wow, we have microbes, fat antibodies, lactose, HMOs, proteins, calcium, vitamins, minerals. I think we covered all of this today. Well done. But no one voted for lacto and tetrose, so neither of you get 5 points. Okay.
So, and I bet if people wanted to know more about the stuff we talked about, they could go to the Savor page and see where we've archived a whole bunch of information.
Oh, absolutely, and it'll be there indefinitely, from my understanding. Okay, so in our final round, we're going to talk about, we call this 8 maids of milking, and we want to talk about future direction. So where do we see lactation and milk science going in the next 10 years? What should we be focusing on? What's really important if we want to make a difference in human health? Katie.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some tremendous growth in the area of understanding the ways in which hormonal signals in mother's milk are implicated in shaping the infant's behavior. So for the last 15 years, myself and colleagues and many other labs are increasingly looking at the ways that particular hormones in milk are transmitted to the baby. Now, one of the hormones we've looked at very closely are the glucocorticoids. People are probably most familiar with the term cortisol. Don't get stressed. Cortisol does a lot of really amazing things physiologically. And it is particularly elevated during challenges, fights with a spouse, having to give a presentation, getting into a car accident, being chased by a lion. And this is because glucocorticoids, cortisol, are signaling to our body saying where to pull energy from, when to orchestrate an immune response, how to behaviorally respond to a situation. But what we've seen when we look at the glucocorticoids in milk, in rodents and monkeys and in humans, is that those hormones are implicated in the development of cognitive performance, in memory, in how much an individual plays in their exploration, and seems to be associated with faster growth trajectories. So and what's really interesting is that the glucocorticoid or cortisol receptor has the highest expression in mammalian guts during infancy. Right? And the only place that they're really getting cortisol is from the mother's milk. And so it's a signal of her physiological state in ways that are shaping how infants seem to be prioritizing certain behaviors, certain growth trajectories. And I think we're going to see this as a major area of growth moving forward.
Excellent.
Nice.
Bruce, what do you think?
Well, if I look into the future, what we are seeing is we discovered a remarkable property of milk. This combination of the mother's secretions in milk of undigestible matter. The milk is stripped of the nourishment for the baby, and what ends up in the lower intestine is the oligosaccharides, a specific and selective food for bacteria. And this specific strain of bacteria nourishes the baby, protects the baby, guides immunity. It's a remarkable idea of evolution. But we've also discovered that inadvertently we have been stripping this bacteria out from babies. So what I see in the future is bringing the science to practice faster. When the university and the various agencies saw what we had discovered, together the university mobilized resources. The faculty whose discoveries had led to it, the business school, tech transfer, and launched the company Evolved Biosystems to get the bacteria as a product back into babies around the world. And to me, this is a paradigm. Universities are becoming increasingly responsive to the urgency of the health problems of the world and how diet is important to those. Milk is the Rosetta Stone for nourishment. We can learn how to nourish everyone by studying milk. And the key future to me is bringing it to practice.
And that, I think, bringing it to practice is really going to take so many expertises, right? How do you decode the Rosetta Stone of human milk if you don't have a diversity of life scientists deeply invested, chemists, glycobiologists, in complex systems, environmental studies, all of these. But you also need to think about the ways in which people are navigating the world, and that requires social scientists, right? Working with the microbiologists. So you've got anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists, all sorts of people that are thinking about the way people are navigating lives now, and how do we build the world we deserve in the future, right? And you can't do that without onboarding a lot of different kinds of, experts, right? So communicators, philosophers, bioethicists, right? And we need to, as you say, translate this into practice, both at the bedside in terms of medicine, neonatology, pediatricians, but also in terms of our policy and recommendations. So public health, global health, community health. And we need to build partnerships across institutions, funding agencies, governments, and non-governmental agencies, just like you've been doing here at UC Davis.
Yeah, the discoveries we've made have been only possible because of the magnificent collaborative environment that's here, and the ability of scientists in every discipline to work together, to take their perspectives of different fields and address lactation. The complexity of milk is absolutely catastrophically difficult to study. You can't do it as a single lab, even a single discipline. At UC Davis, we have that appreciation of the complexity of the biological world and the multidisciplinary approaches of scientists. And across this campus, the magnificent ability to come together to recognize the opportunities to study milk and then the urgency to bring it to practice, I think is a model of how research is going to be done in the future.
And this is really where we get to in this discussion, that milk, this absolute triumph of an evolutionary trajectory spanning hundreds of millions of years, and the individual milk that a parent produces that reflects the here and now and the there and then and spanning across generations is such an exquisite adaptation that if we want to improve human health 100 years from now, we need to begin today. And I think it's just magnificent the way in which we build these research networks beyond our intellectual disciplinary silos, because it's going to take all of us improving human health into the future.
Nice.
It takes teamwork, doesn't it? I was so excited about everything you guys were saying, I stopped keeping track of score. So we're all winners tonight. Woohoo!
Yeah, we get to do the best work when we stop keeping score.
Thank you for playing What's That Science? Okay, so now we'll take questions from out of the studio audience. Okay, the first question is, I have read that milk from Mennonite moms provides better protection from allergies. Can this be true?
Yeah, this in fact has been studied and the evidence is emerging quite clearly. It's not the milk is different, it's the bacteria. Because Mennonite communities have not embraced as enthusiastically cesarean sections, hygiene, and antibiotics, infants from those communities tend to acquire Bifidobacteria infantis earlier and more broadly. So we think this is further evidence that in fact the reason why allergies have gone up is because babies don't have infantis anymore.
Yep, okay. I have heard that nursing babies can object if mom eats something spicy or unusual. Is that real?
Yeah, so near as we can tell that, as I mentioned, there is a cuisine communication through milk to the baby, and it may be that babies are reacting to something novel, and the facial expressions and the recognition that the flavor is different today is notable, and it talks about, it speaks to the ways in which babies are really just sucking up so much information about the world that they will be navigating. And this is quite important because that variation in human milk is not replicated in anything that is trying to artificially recreate it. And so babies that are fed human milk tend to have different sensitivities to sugar that make them more protected against developing obesity and a number of other kinds of precise ability to detect flavors.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's really interesting. Here's a follow-up to that. So how does that relate to the fact that in the opening slideshow about milk protein that binds to capsaicin and stops the burn from eating spicy food? So what is the property in Bruce, in milk that binds to capsaicin?
Yeah, actually, milk does several things in both for babies and even consumed as dairy product. There are various components that will bind not only flavors but spicy constituents like capsaicin and shield them from the receptors. It's why I tend to eat ice cream.
With your jalapenos.
It's such a nice protection.
Can the reduction of B. infantis be related to the use of breast pumps?
Well, that's an interesting question. Probably unlikely. So the acquisition of Bifidobacteria infantis is a classic example of ecology, right? That babies will acquire the bacteria that they encounter in their immediate environment. Historically, mothers and babies were abundant, and the babies all had Bifidobacteria infantis, and everyone was picking up babies, and of course, hygiene was not historically what it is today, so if you picked up a baby, you were getting Bifidobacteria infantis. And then if you picked up another baby, you were the vehicle that transferred. So Bifidobacteria was transferring everywhere. In modern terms, not so much. So one of the benefits of blocking transfer of bacteria is the blocking of pathogens, but at the same time, we're blocking the transfer of specific bacteria that are beneficial. The good news is you can put Bifidobacteria infantis back. Breast pumps are probably not the reason why Bifidobacteria infantis is not transferring. Historically, there has not been many barriers to transfer.
Right, so do you want to maybe follow up on whether or not B. infantis is in milk? Is that sort of, where there is this idea of that bacteria is in milk? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, breast milk is certainly part of the ecological environment that leads to the inoculation of babies with various microbial constituents. However, if you do the math, where are the major sources of bacteria coming from? Breast milk does not appear to be a major player in that ecological process. The babies are getting bacteria from all over. If you look at the bacteria in milk, they tend to reflect the environment of the mother.
Right.
So we don't see at this point considerable evidence to support that milk is selecting bacteria from the mother and delivering them to the baby. And in fact, from historical, in essence, ecological terms, there wasn't a need. The environment was teeming with bifidobacteria infantis. There was lots of babies, lots of breastfed babies, and so we think we need to think now, not only for babies, but for all of us. If beneficial bacteria are in fact an important part of our lives, and feeding those bacteria is an important part of our nourishment, we've got to understand this in detail and then start changing our ecology. We're not going to go back to dropping babies in the mud. We are not. Right? And similarly, we're not going to go back to providing foods that have been randomly inoculated with bacteria from the environment. No. So we're going to have to understand bacteria well enough that we can include that as a dimension in the future of food. It's going to be interesting.
Okay, our next question. Do the benefits of breast milk change or decrease as a baby gets older? I breastfeed my child who is almost 4 years old.
Yeah, this is, I think, a really great question. And the answer is it's complicated. So the benefits of breast milk can be as little as 1 day of breast milk. So a colleague of ours in Manitoba, Megan Azad, has shown that there can be a benefit of just one feed of breast milk. And that in part is because after birth, right? Because the earlier something is experienced during development, in general, the greater the impact. Right, so either something beneficial or an insult, right, is going to exert a greater influence. In the first days after birth, the infant's intestinal tract is much more permeable. Much more things can pass from the mother through the infant's gut into the infant's circulation, and that's going to have a tremendous impact. And similarly, that initial seeding and feeding of the microbes can have a very significant long-term influence, right? So changing things way downstream gets a lot trickier. But we know that the behavioral activity of breastfeeding is more than just the milk that's being transferred. There's important bonding between the parent and the baby or the child. There is quiet together time. There are other aspects of behavioral and psychological development that are implicated in this. And so it's quite important to understand, is there a specific time window where there's the biggest impact? Well, it depends on what dimension of development we're talking about. And we find that when you look across, let's say, 113 different subsistence populations that live traditional lifestyles, it's typical to breastfeed for somewhere between 2 and 3 years, but sometimes longer. And when we look at our closest paleo ancestors and relatives, look at Australopithecines or Neanderthals, we see that the Australopithecines have, weaning practices very similar to chimpanzees. 5 million years ago, 4.5 million years ago, and Homo Neanderthals or Homo sapiens Neanderthals, they were doing exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months and then continued breastfeeding out to 2 or 3 years, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. It depends, and there's a lot of variation. It depends.
Okay, our next question. Continuing on the topic of baby's age, is there a specific time window during which B. infantis should be reintroduced to a newborn baby?
Yeah, this is a great question. And all indications that we have looked at, the earlier the better. Mm-hmm. Historically, it is pretty clear that bifidobacteria infantis started literally at birth or very shortly after. And we see no benefit to, in essence, a chaotic process of a variety of proteobacteria, gram-negative bacteria colonizing first and creating chaos. No, you want to get infanticide as early as possible. Protect the baby, start the process of nourishing, guiding the baby as soon as possible. We recommend day one. We think there are benefits all the way through, but the earlier the better.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question specific to formula feeding. Okay, so in the past, formula companies could donate formula to hospitals, but could not advertise it to the public. President Ronald Reagan changed that to allow formula companies to advertise directly to the public. Any comment about how formula marketing affects breastfeeding? Katie, you want to take this one?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I think it's quite important to step back and recognize that there are times in which artificial breast milk or formulas are, if we look at them as an intervention or a medication for when breast milk is not available, then it's a quite important thing. What we need to do is build infrastructure so that breast milk is more available to more babies in more places. We need more baby-friendly hospitals. We need to do a better job of supporting breastfeeding. And so in that sense, the ways in which marketing complicates how people are navigating infant feeding decisions, the perception that formula is the same is counterproductive to maximizing human health.
Yeah. Okay. All right. This may be our last question. How does the use of human milk, fortifiers, and pasteurization of milk for preterm and medically fragile infants impact bacteria within the milk and the infant GI tract?
Wow.
Good question.
That is a great question. Do you give points?
Should we should give points.
How many points for the best question of the night?
Well, to our audience.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe a little bit of clarification for everyone. Premature babies this is one of the growing problems that babies and mothers are facing. More and more babies are born premature now, and premature babies they're premature, and their intestine, etc., is really not ideally, in essence, developed for milk. So if they can get breast milk early as possible, they do better. But neonatologists have found that breast milk is evolved for a full-term baby. For a preterm baby, it seems to be a little bit too dilute. And concentrating breast milk seems to allow premature babies to develop more successfully. That's led to the development of fortifiers, ways to increase the protein and solids content of breast milk to match the growing demands of those babies. So in fact, what we have found is premature babies can benefit tremendously from getting the bacteria early. And concentrating breast milk is valuable if you concentrate, in essence, everything. If you, by concentrating, strip out the oligosaccharides, you put the baby at a liability. If you can maintain the oligosaccharides, we have demonstrated clinically that premature babies, they when inoculated with B. infantis, the B. infantis grows, multiplies, the microbiome becomes very similar to a full-term baby. So fortifiers don't get in the way. If they're done right, they, in essence, develop normally. Pasteurization does not harm the oligosaccharides in breast milk. So pasteurization is not a problem. However, there are things that are damaged by pasteurization, not the least of which are the enzymes. So ideally, in essence, we should get breast milk, donor breast milk. We should develop technologies that allow milk to be, in essence, transferred from mothers as donor milk, but doesn't have aggressive heat pasteurization. That's a technology that various scientists here at UC Davis are working on. There's urgency to it. Great question.
Wonderful. Okay, that was our last question, but do you each want to give a closing comment before we say goodbye to our audience?
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a delightful evening talking about something that all of us have dedicated our lives to studying and communicating, and a really important facet for improving human health. So it's been a delight to watch and participate in this science as it has unfolded, and it's been fantastic to be here communicating about it tonight. Thank you, UC Davis Libraries. Thank you, Robert Mondavi Institute. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Bruce. It's been a pleasure.
Wow, I can't add anything. I'd like to thank Katie for coming. It's been absolutely delightful to have Katie as a collaborator over all the years, and just to watch that development's been particularly nice. Echo all of your congratulations, and to all the mothers who have helped our program over the years. You're our heroes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mackenzie.
Thank you. Jenny, Katie, and Bruce, that was a fascinating and informative conversation. I don't think I've heard anything quite that exciting in quite a long time. I would also like to thank all of the Robert Mondavi Institute and UC Davis Library staff who've labored over this event for many months. And finally, I would like to thank you for joining us tonight. I wish we could have been in person, and we look forward to the day when we can welcome you back to the campus for a future Savor event. So in the meantime, we invite you to leave any feedback or suggestions you have for future events in the brief survey that you'll see when you log off. And have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you for coming again.